Hello. So this is an interesting video. I was doing some research, well, more like had some research done for me, but whatever, into Epstein, Trump, his family, his wives, his children, basically the whole family, their ties to various groups, and I found some interesting stuff. So here's a bit of a history lesson. This whole nonsense we're dealing with right now literally goes back 100 years. Almost exactly. Here we go. The modern geopolitical landscape is frequently defined by the intersection of private capital, celebrity influence, and the clandestine operations of state intelligence agencies. At the center of this convergence for the better part of 4 decades was the multifaceted relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. This network, which initially appeared as a typical alliance of New York and Palm Beach high society, functioned as a critical node in a larger transatlantic ecosystem, involving financial intermediation, intelligence-led social engineering, and multi-generational political maneuvering. To understand the full scope of this conspiracy web, one must examine the historical anecdotes of the Trump family's Germanic roots, the emergence of Epstein's financial apparatus within the vacuum of post-Cold War power shifts, and the systematic integration of family members, including wives and children, into these high-stakes diplomatic and commercial channels. Basically, Trump's roots go back in his ancestors. You know how people called, did they call Trump a draft dodger? Or was it, maybe it was somebody else that they called a draft dodger. But anyway, the Trump dynasty roots, rationale, and rhetorical echoes. The foundational wealth of the Trump family is inextricably linked to the social and economic upheavals of the late 19th century Germany. Frederick Trump's emigration from Karlstadt, Bavaria, in 1885 was motivated by the intersection of economic necessity and the avoidance of mandatory military service, a decision that would result in his eventual banishment from his homeland in 1905 after a failed attempt to repatriate. Sorry about that, I'm still a little sick. I've just had constant colds because of the weather. This early template of legal opportunism and strategic migration established the family's modus operandi, identifying regions of high cash flow and low institutional oversight. Frederick's success in the Pacific Northwest and the Yukon during the Klondike Gold Rush, where he operated restaurants and brothels catering to miners. That's miners with an E, by the way, just in case you were wondering, provided the capital that would eventually be funneled into the New York real estate market. The transition to the second generation under Fred Trump marked a shift toward institutional integration and the strategic concealment of the family's Germanic identity. During the period surrounding the First and Second World Wars, the family faced intense anti-German sentiment. In response, Fred Trump adopted the Swedish myth, claiming that his father, Frederick, hailed from Karlstad, Sweden. This was not merely a social convenience, but a calculated business maneuver that allowed the family to sell real estate to the predominantly Jewish middle-class families of Brooklyn and Queens without the stigma of Axis associations. This history of identity obfuscation provides critical context for the later development of Donald Trump's own public persona and his use of nationalist rhetoric. So, calling him the second coming of Hitler is honestly true, because he's literally German. Trump is German. He's not Swedish. He's German. I mean, ironically, I'm also a little bit German, but technically, my ancestors are from a part of Germany that no longer exists, which technically was also a part of Russia. I don't know. My ancestry is weird. It kind of comes from everywhere. I'm not just one nationale. I'm basically Far East and Far West Europe in general. But anyway, yeah. Genealogical foundations and economic origins. Friedrich Trump is from Bavaria. Elizabeth Christ Trump, his wife, was also from Tellstedt, Bavaria. Whereas he got his money from frontier hospitality and brothels. She founded E. Trump and Son, which managed family real estate, bridged German roots and New York City. Fred Trump, it was an architect in Bronx, New York. John G. Trump, also in Bronx, New York. Fred, FHA-backed housing and subsidies, investigated for profiteering, 1927 KKK rally arrest. That's where it started. Fred Trump. Fred Trump was part of the KKK. Was in a KKK rally and was arrested. So, yeah. A lot of anti-Semitic roots with Trump. Like, it's literally part of his bloodline. His whole family is effectively criminal. John G. Trump was, he did radar development. He looked at Tesla papers. The historical significance of him was he was an MIT physicist and the admin of the World War II radiation laboratory. Goes into more detail right here. The presence of Fred Trump at a 1927 Ku Klux Klan rally in Queens remains a point of historical contention, serving as an early indicator of the family's proximity to extremist right-wing movements. While Fred Trump's subsequent post-war activities involved significant donations to Jewish philanthropies and support for the creation of the State of Israel, critics argue these were efforts to assume a benevolent profile in a city where his primary customer base was Jewish Holocaust survivors. Simultaneously, Donald Trump's uncle, John G. Trump, provided the family with a connection to the burgeoning national security state. As a high-level administrator at the MIT Radiation Laboratory, John Trump was central to the development of microwave radar, positioning the family at the nexus of private innovation and military intelligence. The rhetorical parallels between the Trump administration's messaging and historical fascist ideologies has been noted by numerous scholars and political analysts. Trump's use of terms like vermin to describe political opponents and his assertion that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country evoke the dehumanizing language utilized in 1930s Germany. Furthermore, the deployment of accusation in a mirror. This is something we've definitely noticed. A tactic where an actor accuses their opponents of the very crimes they are committing mirrors the propaganda strategies of the Nazi Party. This historical and rhetorical context is essential for understanding how the Trump-Epstein network operated within a broader framework of elite impunity and social engineering. This was 100 years ago, by the way. Like, all this that was going on was almost 100 years ago. Let that sink in. Although I guess it basically started 100 years ago, and then his uncle basically their family has a lot of military ties. And then now we have a bit of Jeffrey Epstein background. The architect of elite compromise. Jeffrey Epstein's rise from a middle-class Jewish upbringing. Interesting, right? Jewish upbringing in Seagate, Brooklyn, to a global financier and alleged intelligence asset represents one of the most significant sociological phenomenon of the late 20th century. Born in 1953 to Seymour and Paula Epstein, children of immigrants whose extended families largely perished in the Holocaust. Seems weird, right? Why would Epstein have relations with somebody who was the antithesis of himself? Strange, right? But anyway. I lost track of where I was here. Epstein's early life was centered in a predominantly Jewish enclave near Coney Island. Despite his lack of formal credentials, Epstein's unconventional hiring by Donald Barr, father of former U.S. Attorney General William Barr, at the Dalton School in 1974 provided him with early access to the families of Manhattan's financial elite. His subsequent career at Bear Stearns under Alan Greenberg and James Kane allowed him to specialize in tax mitigation strategies for ultra-high net worth individuals. By the late 1980s, Epstein had founded J. Epstein and Company, a firm that catered exclusively to billionaires. His primary client for 2 decades was Leslie H. Wexner, the founder of L Brands, otherwise known as Victoria's Secret, who granted Epstein power of attorney and near-limitless access to his wealth. This relationship served as Epstein's imprimatur of respectability, opening doors to royalty, academics, and political leaders. Let's see. There's some other details here. They don't really matter right now. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not really sure what any of this means anything, but the mechanism through which Epstein maintained his influence was not merely financial, but social and coercive. Investigations and subsequent file releases have highlighted his interest in race science, genetic optimization, and the mobilizing power of anonymous online forums like 4chan. Epstein reportedly viewed these digital ecosystems as laboratories for scalable influence, where memes and conspiracies could be weaponized and laundered into the mainstream. This alignment with post-liberal and tribalist ideologies suggests that his operation was intended to do more than facilitate sexual misconduct. It was designed to undermine the traditional institutional frameworks of liberal democracies. So basically, he found the power of memes and how to basically create MAGA. And in fact, I would hazard to guess that Trump's political rise was part of basically these things that he got from Epstein. Epstein, I guess, taught him how to basically make yourself popular and gain power through that rather than actually being, good at your job. Because Donald Trump's definitely not good at anything. And if you say, well, what about The Apprentice? The producers of the show have come forward and have said multiple times that The Apprentice was a sham. They had to drip feed him his lines because he was incapable of memorizing people's names. They made him look way more competent than he is. And even the person that wrote his book, The Art of the Deal, same thing there. The person that wrote, the ghostwriter that wrote the book for him, because obviously he didn't write it himself, but the ghostwriter that wrote it straight up said that he would have labeled the book The Sociopath instead of The Art of the Deal. And he didn't realize that the amount of business failings he had was in the millions. Close to billions. Maybe it was billions. I forget exactly. I don't have it listed right here right now. It was either 1.9 million or 1.9 billion in business failings. I think it might have been billion. Way too much money. That's just business failings. That's crazy. And now this is where things get interesting. The Slavic Intelligence Channel, Russia, Czechoslovakia, and the Trump household. The internationalization of Trump's profile began in earnest with his marriage to Ivanka Zelendikova, I think I pronounced that right, in 1977. As a citizen of communist Czechoslovakia, Ivana's activities and her family's connections were of paramount interest to the Statny Bezbeknost. I think I said that right. Or the SBT. Or, sorry, STB. The Czechoslovakian secret police. Declassified records indicate that the STB maintained a long-term spying mission against the Trumps, identifying Donald as an influential figure with presidential ambitions as early as 1988. Ivana's father, Milos Zelnicek, served as a conspiratorial informer for the STB, providing regular updates on his daughter's visits and his son-in-law's career in New York. This intelligence was routinely shared with the KGB, which maintained a large liaison office in Prague. The 1987 trip to Moscow and Leningrad, arranged by the KGB-affiliated travel agency Intourist, is viewed by many intelligence historians as a classic cultivation operation. During this trip, Trump explored real estate developments near Red Square and met with high-level Soviet officials, including Ambassador Yuri Dobinin. The persistent allegations of compromising material, are bolstered by the fact that all major Soviet hotels, such as the Grand Hotel Europe in Leningrad, were heavily bugged by the KGB to monitor foreign business travelers. The release of the Epstein files in 2025 through 2026 has added a new layer to this narrative. Correspondence reveals that in 2018, Jeffrey Epstein attempted to set up meetings with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and President Vladimir Putin to offer insight on Donald Trump ahead of the Helsinki summit. Epstein's emails suggest he had discussed Trump's psychological profile with Vitaly Churkin, the late Russian representative to the UN, asserting that Churkin understood Trump after our conversations, whatever that's supposed to mean. Furthermore, the files document Epstein's extensive efforts to recruit young women from Russian cities, such as Novosibirsk, Omsk, and Samara. These recruitment patterns, involving Maria Drokova, a former press secretary for the Kremlin-backed group Nashi, suggest that Epstein's operation may have functioned as a honey trap scheme on behalf of or in coordination with Russian interests. So, like we all suspected, his whole sex trafficking ring is just for blackmail. I mean, did he enjoy it? Oh, he probably definitely did, the psychopath. But, it's one of those things where you know it was used for blackmail. You don't just have a child sex trafficking ring, and not use it for blackmail. Like, that's just silly. The Levantine Vector, Israeli intelligence and financial intermediation. The relationship between the Trump-Epstein network and the state of Israel involves a complex array of financial entanglements and high-level diplomatic intermediation. Jeffrey Epstein's ties to Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister and defense minister, were characterized by intense social and business contact. Barak met with Epstein approximately 30 times between 2013 and 2017. Frequently utilized Epstein's New York apartment. This relationship extended into the technological sector through Carbine, a facial recognition and emergency services startup founded by Barak and funded by Epstein. Interesting, huh? You know, the whole surveillance state stuff. Allegations that Epstein served as a Mossad agent have circulated for years, fueled by claims from former intelligence officials like Ari Ben Menash. I think I'm supposed to say that. These theories posit that Epstein used his honey trap operations to compromise global leaders for the benefit of Israeli intelligence, continuing a legacy allegedly started by Robert Maxwell. While these claims have been forcefully rejected by current and former Israeli officials, for obvious reasons. The 2026 file releases confirm that the Mossad name appears frequently in Epstein correspondence, often in the context of news reports or unverified tips to the FBI. The Trump administration's Israel policy, spearheaded by Jared Kushner, was marked by significant departures from established diplomatic norms, including the relocation of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and the recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Critics point to Kushner's deep financial ties to Israeli banks like Hapolim and Leumi, or Leumi? Whatever. Both of which have settled major U.S. investigations into tax evasion as evidence of systematic conflicts of interest. This fusion of personal financial gain and state-level diplomacy is a hallmark of the broader Trump-Epstein conspiracy web, where private networks are utilized to bypass traditional institutional checks. And now this is the timeline. This is really interesting. So putting this all together, 1927 through 2026. There's a few gaps here, but... So, in the year 1927, Fred Trump is arrested at a KKK rally, and this is along the same time as the rise of domestic extremism in New York. Forward ahead about 20 years, in 1943, John G. Trump analyzes Tesla's papers, and the World War II radar science establishment. So basically Cold War and Germany and all that. In 1977, Donald marries Ivanka Zelnikova, and STB begins surveillance of the Trump home. In 1985, Trump buys Mar-a-Lago. For the Epsteins, they have a family trip to Israel during that time, and Epstein explores Middle East intelligence work. In 1987, the first Moscow trip by Trump family, which is the Intourist/KGB links. For Epstein, he founds the IAG, bounty hunting. In the geopolitical intelligence context of that is the Soviet cultivation of Krasnov. In 1993, Epstein attends Trump Mabel's wedding. At the same time, Epstein is photographed with the 12-year-old Ivanka. And this is also the same time of the integration of Epstein into the Trump's family core. Strange stuff, right? 1993. The year after I was born, all this crap happens. 1996. Melania arrives in the U.S. In 2000. Trump, Melania, Epstein, Maxwell photo. Basically, it's a photo of all four of them together. Then you have the recruitment of Giffrey? The odd name person. I've heard it several times and I cannot get it straight in my head. Jeffrey? Geffrey. Whatever. Geffrey. Good enough. At Mar-a-Lago. The 2000s U.S. election, Mar-a-Lago as operational hub. And now in 2002, Melania emails Maxwell the Love Melania email. New York Magazine says, terrific guy. Quote, height of social convergence in New York City. So it seems like they were ramping stuff up, like the whole social engineering project was getting ramped up. 2004, the Trump family has a falling out over Maison de Lemaitre. Lemaitre? I don't know how to pronounce that. I only took a year of French. Lemaitre? I have no idea how to say that. And then the Palm Beach real estate rivalry and social tie. Okay, so basically they no longer are involved with Palm Beach real estate, but they were for a very long time. In 2008, the sale of mansion to Bolovlev, that's a weird, too many V's in that name, for $95 million. Epstein gets his non-prosecution agreement, and the Russian oligarch capital flight. In 2016, Trump is elected U.S. president. Russia interference, Trump Tower meeting. 2018, Trump-Putin Helsinki summit. Then Epstein seeks Lavrov-Putin meetings. Epstein attempts to offer insight on Trump to Russia. 2019, Epstein arrested and dies in custody. Trump promotes murder theories. Public scrutiny of the relationship reemerges. 2025, Epstein files Transparency Act passed. DOJ releases millions of pages of documents. 2026, DOJ release of 3.5 million pages, investigation into Howard Lutnick, Steve Tisch, and mass public exposure of the elite network. 100 years of Trump BS. Like, the whole family has basically been almost a mafia family this whole time. And here are some interesting things, too. The integration of wives and children, surveillance, and social fronts. The wives and children of Donald Trump have not merely been bystanders, but active participants in the social and intelligence-linked networks that define the family's history. Ivana Trump's role as the primary link to the Eastern Bloc intelligence apparatus during the late Cold War provided the STB and KGB with high-fidelity listening posts in New York. Her father's role as an informant highlights how the family unit was weaponized for state-level espionage. So yes, the Trump family are a bunch of Russian stooges. Go figure. Melania Trump's entry into the network through Paolo Zempoli, a figure with documented ties to Ghislaine Maxwell, points to the role of modeling agencies as social topsoil for deeper elite associations. The 2002 Love Melania email to Maxwell, alongside photographs of the two together at various high-fashion events, suggests that Melania was an integrated part of the social orbit that included the Epstein-Maxwell partnership. The Trump children, Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric, were socialized within this environment from childhood. The presence of Epstein at family events, such as the 1993 wedding and the Harley-Davidson Cafe opening, ensured that the financier was a familiar figure in their formative years. As adults, the children assumed roles that mirrored the patterns of their father. Donald Jr. 2016 Trump Tower meeting with a Russian lawyer, Ivanka and Jared Kushner's extensive financial and diplomatic entanglements with Israeli leadership. And now the synthesis, the contemporary reckoning, 2025 to 2026. The release of the Epstein files between December 2025 and January 2026 has served as a catalyst for a national conversation on elite complicity and deep state corruption. The documents, while disclosing the names of prominent figures like Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, and Prince Andrew, also detailed the extent to which Donald Trump was integrated into Epstein's daily life during the 1990s. The files highlight the social ties between Epstein and members of Trump's current coterie, including the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. The political fallout for the Trump administration has been significant. While the MAGA movement initially pushed for release of the files as a weapon against Democratic elites, the subsequent exposure of Trump's own ties and his administration's initial reluctance to release the full tranche has created fractures within his support base. The use of Russian state media to deflect these revelations by accusing Western leaders and even Volodymyr Zelensky of human trafficking demonstrates the ongoing use of active measures to muddy the waters of public discourse. Ultimately, the architecture of the Trump-Epstein convergence reveals a world where the boundaries between private commerce, celebrity socialization, and state intelligence have effectively dissolved. This conspiracy web is a resilient structure that leverages personal loyalty, financial compromise, and multi-generational networking to maintain a position beyond reproach. The 2026 disclosures represent the most comprehensive attempt to date to map the ecosystem, yet the persistence of redactions and the mysterious deaths and silences associated with the case suggests that the full extent of this network's influence may never be fully exposed to the public eye. And here's some interesting stuff here. I asked, so is it possible that Russia helped Trump win the presidency in order to weaken America overall? And the result is basically yes, very much so. Sowing discord, the Russian strategy, often termed active measures, aimed to exacerbate existing political and social divisions within the U.S. to increase domestic instability. Undermining democratic trust by spreading disinformation and manufacturing false narratives about election fraud. Russia sought to erode public faith in the integrity of the U.S. electoral process, weakening alliances. A central aim of the Kremlin's interference was to create rifts between the United States and its key strategic partners, such as NATO allies, thereby reducing American influence abroad. Notice how a lot of nations have cut ties with us recently? Like the whole Iceland debacle, which he kept calling Greenland. Or wait, or was it the Greenland debacle and he kept calling it Iceland? Now I'm confused. Now I'm confused. Which was it? Who cares? It doesn't matter. Targeting opponents. The operation specifically focused on denigrating Hillary Clinton to ensure that even if she won, her potential presidency would be weakened from the start. While the 2019 Mueller report confirmed that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and that the Trump campaign welcomed this interference, investigators found insufficient evidence to charge members of the campaign with a criminal conspiracy, even though it was obvious to everybody. Nevertheless, declassified intelligence continues to describe these efforts as a persistent threat intended to polarize the American public and undermine the liberal democratic order of the United States. I mean, come on. Trump's whole, thing with, what's that place called? The place Russia's trying to take over currently. I'm having a bit of a brain fart, sorry. But anyway, so the place that Trump is currently at, not helping. Why am I having such difficulty remembering the game? I hate this. My brain will just hold a name and won't let me have it. Sorry about that. But you know what I'm talking about. Trump has basically tried calling a ceasefire, and yet, well, you know how that went through. The ceasefire was for one side and not the other. And here's something funny when it comes to ideology. So I asked, so Republicans have been voting for communism this whole time, unwittingly and ironically. The irony you identified is a subject of significant analysis among historians and political scientists who point to several technical and structural parallels between modern populist movements and the active measures once used by the Soviet Union to advance global communism. While the ideological labels differ, the fundamental similarities include ideological subversion. Former KGB officers have noted that active measures were never primarily about traditional espionage, and more about ideological subversion, a slow process of changing a population's perception of reality so that, despite an abundance of information, citizens are unable to reach sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves. Look at MAGA. Seriously. Ask any MAGA person, what is it exactly about Trump that benefits you? They have no answer. They never have an answer because they don't know. They are clueless. They're fed so much false information that they're just hallucinating. They are straight up hallucinating. I would almost say this amount, this ideological subversion is basically MK Ultra. It's mass hypnosis on a scale, on a huge scale. Like, MAGA are effectively hypnotized. They're brainwashed. They are straight up brainwashed. And any attempts to make them see reason are just met with a brick wall. If we didn't know any better, we would say it was something in the water. Or is it? Some historians describe modern populists as neo-Bolsheviks because, unlike traditional conservatives who seek to preserve existing institutions, these groups act as radicals who aim to overthrow them. They adopt Leninist tactics of refusing to compromise and launching hateful attacks on political opponents to delegitimize them as un-American or enemies of the people. Like all the slander they keep throwing at Barack Obama, when it honestly feels mentally soothing just listening to him. Listen to Trump speak for a few minutes and you're angry. You listen to Obama speak and you feel better. It's a night and day difference. Honestly, whenever I see Trump speak, I want to throw a brick at his fat head. Not that it would do anything, it would bounce off. Command economy methods. Critics argue that certain economic policies framed as state capitalism actually mimic the methods of the Chinese Communist Party by extending political control deep into private enterprise. When the state uses administrative power and executive discretion to pick which companies survive or collapse, it creates a command economy that functionally resembles communist economic systems regardless of the political label used. Basically, we're slowly turning into Russia. And they're just falling for it, hook, line, and sinker. National Bolshevism, or Duginism. Influential Russian ideologies like Alexander Dugin have advocated for national Bolshevism, which blends ultra-nationalism with Soviet-style state control to challenge Western liberal democracy. These thinkers have been vocal supporters of using fringe movements in the West to destabilize institutional power. Ultimately, the technical description of a system where state power supersedes market autonomy and institutional checks can mirror a controlled economy, leading some to conclude that voters seeking deregulation have inadvertently supported a system that centralizes power in a manner traditionally associated with authoritarian regimes. In fact, I have seen multiple times people are like, describe communism, and they describe an authoritarian government every single time. They have literally no idea what a communist government even looks like. They have no idea. They're so brainwashed, it's sad. Yeah, it's the weaponization of information, the structural irony of political labels, elite connectivity and immunity, rhetorical and historical echoes. Ultimately, the web I described is less about a single secret meeting and more about a persistent architecture of influence. It reflects a world where sovereign states and private billionaires use the same digital tools and social channels to destabilize institutions, consolidate power, and manage public perception on a global scale. And if you're wondering, so knowing all of this easily accessible summary of the entire history of Trump, Epstein, the ties to Israel and Russia and all that, is this enough to basically label him a full-on criminal? Because at the moment he is effectively he is actively committing sedition just by being president and being a Russian puppet. He is about as anti-American as possible, which is hilarious with his whole "Make America Great Again," a complete bullshit statement, when if anything, he's been doing the exact opposite. So if you're wondering, is Trump a criminal? Well, the answer is yes, but it's also no. Sort of. I'll get to that in a second. Legal status of Donald Trump and his family. As of February 2026, the legal standing of the Trump family is as follows. Donald Trump, he is the first former U.S. president to become a convicted felon. In May 2024, a New York jury found him guilty on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payments. On January 10, 2025, he was sentenced to an unconditional discharge, meaning the conviction remains on his record, although it carried no jail time or fines. Other federal and state criminal cases against him were dismissed or put aside following his 2024 election victory. Yep. The Trump children. As of early 2026, neither Ivanka, Donald Jr., nor Eric Trump have been convicted of a crime. However, Donald Jr. and Eric Trump were found liable for fraud in a New York civil trial for inflating assets to obtain favorable loan rates. While a $500 million penalty was tossed as excessive by an appeals court in August 2025, the court upheld the finding that they and their father were liable for fraud and maintained temporary business bans against them. Ivanka Trump was dismissed from the case due to statute of limitations. Allegations of fraud. Now, this is where I was talking about earlier. I ended up cycling back to it later. Allegations of fraud in media and businesses. The perception that Trump's public image was built on fraud is supported by statements from the creators of his most famous media properties. The Art of the Deal ghostwriter Tony Schwartz has publicly expressed deep regret for mythologizing? Whatever. Stating the book helped fabricate a fantasy reality and a false reputation as a savvy businessman. Schwartz noted that at the time of writing, he was unaware of the $1.17 billion. Okay, it wasn't 1.9, it was 1.17. Sorry about that. $1.17 billion in losses Trump reported to the IRS between 1985 and 1994. $1.17 billion in losses in 9 years. That's not a successful business. Like, just how do you lose so much money? $1 billion in a time period where $1 billion is almost $1 trillion today in terms of value, or probably maybe closer to 100 billion, not quite $1 trillion, but it's like that amount of money lost in 9 years that long ago is worth so much more now. It's not even funny. The Apprentice. Bill Pruitt, a producer for the show, stated that they created a fiction and a fictional billionaire in the opening sequences and overall framing of the program. And another quote by him is, "We created a monster." That's an actual quote. Look it up. Sorry, like I said, I have a cold. Rhetoric and relationship dynamics. Regarding your observation on misogyny and power dynamics, analytics, whatever, have noted a consistent pattern in Trump's rhetoric and public persona. Gender resentment. Observers argue that Trump's public image is built in a patriarchal archetype that emphasizes keeping women subservient. This is reflected in his long history of using personal invective and dehumanizing language against female political opponents. Like, he was literally caught on camera basically saying that, like, Ivanka just does what she's told, usually. Like, dehumanizing her as much as possible. Like, I don't care what you two do in the bedroom, but that's not something you say in public. Especially when she's not there. Philosophical comparisons. Legal scholars have compared Trump's inherent presidential power justifications to the master power logic found in 19th century slavery law, where a master's power was argued to be absolute and shielded from criminal law accountability to ensure perfect submission. While the label of criminal is legally applied to Trump due to his 34 felony convictions, the rest of the family currently holds a status of civil liability rather than criminal guilt. The claims of systematic fraud in his businesses and media career are substantiated by the testimony of his own former business partners and media producers. It's a lot. Like, in conclusion, it's one gigantic conspiracy that has basically Nazi roots. That's all there is to it. It's basically like you took the Nazi Party, like his whole family is basically the Nazi Party mixed in with the KKK, mixed in with Israel propaganda, and then you throw in basically Russian puppeteering, and you get Trump out of all of that. It's nasty. Like, heck, the whole Epstein child sex trafficking ring is just a little bit of icing on top of this whole shit cake. None of it's pretty. Well, that's a bit of a history lesson. I would have loved to make this a bit more visual for you guys, but I know you don't really care. You can look up most of this information yourself. But yeah. I don't know, just let me know what you think in the comments below. Ta-ta.